Alright, let's talk inner shadows. So if I click this, it's gonna, just like the shadow section, it's gonna apply a default just like it did above with some slightly different values. So we've got a 0 for X, Y is 1, blur is 3. So same kind of deal here, but the shadows are applied in a different manner. So for X, it's going to push from the inside into the shape, and for Y, it's going to push inwards or outwards if it's a negative value in the shape. But same principles apply as we saw for the shadows. So, and one way to see this a little bit better, it kind of gives you a sunken in feeling, but if you have a border applied, it's a little bit harder to see that. So let's turn off the border here. That's another feature here too. If I didn't mention that already, unchecking the checkbox, you'll see that effect is taken away. So now that I've taken away that border, and let's click off this, it gives it a little bit of a sunken in feeling, so kind of like an engraved or beveled feel to it. Let's get back to inner shadows here. And if I apply a little bit more of an inner shadow, let's say 2 for the X and 2 for the Y, it's a little more pronounced. Maybe I can make it even more so. Actually, you know what? We got to apply that to the actual. That's why it all went away. Okay, so now let's bump this up to 2. Let's bump up the Y to 2. So now it's a little more pronounced and it has that kind of sunken in feeling. I'm going to go ahead and do something a little bit different here. I'll show you the effect that I want to apply to our button. I'm going to bring the border back. And for the inner shadow, I'm going to change the color for this. Let's do something orangish. I'm going to take this and I'm going to select right near the corner there. I'm going to lighten it up just a little bit. And it's kind of blending in with that border. Let's take the border off. And it looks okay, but not as big a fan as I thought I would be for that. So you kind of get the idea. You can pick different colors, and we can see if we darken it up just a little bit, that might be a little bit better. With the border, it doesn't look as good. I kind of like it with the border and not the inner shadow. So let's go ahead and click off that inner shadow. Let's just keep that guy going. So if you don't like one of these and maybe you want to get rid of it, you don't want to see it, once you uncheck it here, come up here to the trash can, click the trash can, then it'll dump it. It'll go away. Alright, next let's talk blurs. So I'm going to click blur, and just like before, it's going to apply a default. And let's start at the top here with Gaussian blur. You see the Gaussian blur really just blurs out the edges. It's got a little bit of solid stuff in the middle, and you can increase and decrease the amount of blur with the up and down arrows or the little slider here on how much. And the higher you go, the more you can see through it, and then you've got almost nothing, which can be a really cool effect if you want that. It's a cool way to get kind of an orange circular kind of blurry effect, which can be exactly what you're looking for in your design. I'm going to set that back down, click the drop down, we'll go to motion blur. This one is kind of a left to right blur, and you can increase and decrease over here, same as before, but you also have this angle feature now. So as you click that, or let's just grab the slider, as you move this around, it changes the angle at which that motion blur is applied. Let's click the down arrow here. Now let's go to zoom blur. Same deal here, it applies a default. You've got the ability to increase or decrease the amount of blur, but you also can edit the origin. So by default, it's in the middle, and much like the motion blur, as you move it around, you have the ability to affect how this blur is applied. So you can bring it all the way down here and really retain like the bottom right portion of your button, and then just blow away the upper portion here. So that's a good one. All right, now background blur, that's the one I want to talk to you about, and one that you're probably more familiar with. Now it doesn't really look like anything's applied here, and to see this a little bit better, I'm going to draw out a new shape. Let's go ahead and select our background here, and it looks like that's where our inner shadow got applied earlier. I'm going to uncheck that and delete it. I'm going to hit R on my keyboard for rectangle, and I'm just going to draw out a rectangle here right over the top there. And I think by default, let's apply kind of let's do a whitish color. I'll come down here and let's apply a blur. It's going to apply a Gaussian blur by default, but what I want is the background blur. Now some of you may have seen this before. It's kind of you take a nice photo and you have this blurry background right over the top of it, or something that's slightly blurry. It's a really cool effect and I really like it, especially for login screens. Okay, so by default it's got a blur of 10, but if I look over here, I don't really see a blur. I don't see anything. And so at first thought, some might think, okay, well let me drop the opacity down and then I can see through and I can get the amount of blur that I want, but I can still see everything behind here very clearly, and I'm not sure why. So there's a reason for this, and you have to apply it in kind of 2 stages. So opacity is not going to do it for you. What you need to do, so we can bump that back up to 100%. What you really need to focus on is the opacity here for the fill, which is also the same value for the alpha channel. And you want to drop this down. So as I drop this down, you'll see I can start to see through the color a little bit more. And I want to drop down the opacity. So I'm dropping this opacity down to 2. Then I want to come down here to the amount of background blur that I applied. Drop that down. And as I get it down to something closer to 1, then it's a little bit more visible. At about 1 or 2 is what you'll typically see in a lot of designs. Alright, now let's jump back a little bit, and I'm going to apply some text to the button. I'm going to hit T for text on my keyboard, and let's go ahead and just type. Let's say, let me in. I'm going to hit escape. So now I've got my text here. Let's zoom in a little bit, and let's capitalize our M here. You'll notice that now you can change the text properties of your text here, and as you move this around, you'll notice a lot of the same things apply to different types of layers. I've got the smart guides helping me center my text, so now I've got it right there. So the first drop down here lets you select the type of font that you want to use, and you got a lot of different options here. I'm going to scroll down, and I think I'm going to choose, let's go with Avenir Next. Now I choose Avenir Next because it's got a lot of different weights associated with it. You'll find that some of the text or some of the fonts don't have all these different weights. Sometimes it's just regular, sometimes it's just bold. It depends on what you download or what's in there by default. And let's kind of move down. So I'm going to choose a slightly bolder font. Let's go demi-bold. I want to bump up the size here. You'll notice that I don't have the up and down arrow, but I do have the double-sided arrow. So if I want, I can click and drag that over to the right to increase the size. I'll bump it up to 33. That's pretty good. And I also have the ability to increase the character spacing. That's the gap between the letters here. Not the spaces here necessarily, but the ones between the actual characters. You can increase the line spacing, so if you have multiple lines of text, as you increase this, it's going to increase the amount of spacing between there. Think of double spacing, triple spacing, your paragraphs. All right, and then you also have the ability to change the font color over here. Same as a lot of the other stuff we've been looking at with the color picker. I'm going to just choose a white font or white color for my font. And then you'll notice that I also have the ability to do a lot of different things that we applied before. I can apply different fills, which is kind of the same as up here. I can put a border around my text. I can do shadows. I can do inner shadows. I have the ability to blur my text. So a lot of the same things that we already talked about before you can apply to this. And I think I'm going to do, let's do an inner shadow so it gives it kind of that sunken in feeling into the button. And I'll increase the X value by 1 as well. I like the way that looks. And I jumped over some stuff up here. So with alignment, you have the ability to align your text. Right now mine's left align. You can do center align, you can do right align, or justified. Alright, and with that, I think we are good with text at this point. Let's go ahead and move along. There's still more stuff to cover in the basics, and that is coming up next. I will see you there.